Today, we're going to talk about a contract case, namely Stilk versus Myrick. Facts of the case. In 1809, two sailors entered into an employment contract with the captain of a ship called the Lady Boana. The contract was for a voyage that began in London and was to take them to the Baltic. Basically, they were going to trade goods in the Baltic and then come back to London. But while they were out on the voyage, two of the sailors deserted. Now, this put the captain in a bit of a pickle because he really needed those sailors to work on the ship. And so he made an agreement with the remaining sailors, including our plaintiff, Mr. Stilk, that if they got the ship back to London safely, he would pay them the wages of those two deserters. So that meant that if they completed the voyage, each sailor would get paid for two people's wages. This was basically an extra half a day's pay for each of them. So they accepted that deal, and they ended up completing the voyage and getting the ship back to London. Now, upon arrival, Mr. Stilk attempted to collect his extra wages from the captain, but the captain refused to pay it. And so Mr. Stilk sued the captain for breach of contract. The trial court actually ruled in favor of Mr. Stilk, awarding him the extra wages that he was promised. But the captain appealed that decision, and it eventually came before the English Court of Appeals. So, in this case, the court was considering whether the captain's promise to pay the extra wages was enforceable. So let's move on to the issue. The issue in this case is whether the captain's promise to pay the extra wages was supported by new consideration. This is important because in contract law, for a promise to be enforceable, there must be a bargain for exchange, which means that there needs to be consideration. Consideration can take the form of a promise to do something, or even a promise to refrain from doing something. But whatever the form, there must be a new promise or a new performance that is not already legally required. In order to determine whether there was consideration here, we need to look at the rule. The rule is what is known as the pre-existing duty rule. The pre-existing duty rule provides that a promise to do what you are already contractually obligated to do is not valid consideration for a new promise. In other words, you can't promise to do something that you already have to do and then demand payment for doing that thing. In this case, the sailors had signed on to a contract with the captain. That contract required them to sail the ship back to London, regardless of whether those two sailors deserted or not. The sailors had an obligation to get the ship back to London. So the court reasoned that when the sailors accepted the captain's offer to pay them extra if they brought the ship back to London, they were only promising to perform their existing duties under their original contract with the captain. Therefore, according to the pre-existing duty rule, this was not good enough to satisfy the requirements of consideration. The sailors tried to argue that the desertions created extraordinary circumstances and imposed extra hardship on them, making the captain's promise enforceable. But the court rejected that argument, stating that such hardships were within the contemplation of both parties when the sailors originally signed on to the contract. In commercial transactions like this, the court acknowledged that unforeseen events could transpire, but that was the risk the sailors took when they entered into the contract. So, applying the rule to the facts of this case, the court concluded that the captain's promise to pay extra wages was not enforceable because the sailors only performed their existing duty under their contract. Let's move on to the conclusion. The court held in favor of the captain, finding that there was no valid consideration for the captain's promise to pay extra wages. The case was decided on the basis that the sailors were already contractually obligated to return the ship to London, and therefore they could not demand additional payment for doing so. So let's finish up with why this case matters. First, Stilk versus Myrick serves as a strong precedent for the pre-existing duty rule in contract law. The case illustrates that a party cannot demand additional payment for performing a duty that they are already legally required to perform. Second, this case matters because it protects parties from being forced to make new promises or agreements when they are under pressure to do so. This case makes us understand that sometimes one party may try to take advantage of another party who is in a time of need. In this case, for example, perhaps the sailors were in desperate need to get back to London, and so maybe they felt pressured to make the agreement with the captain. But under the pre-existing duty rule, they would not be forced to make that agreement. Instead, the court would simply enforce the original contract between the parties. If you liked this video, please remember to hit the like button and share it with your friends. And if you love this channel, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.